Okay, good morning everyone. Welcome to Monday, week 12. Exciting, right? I'm excited. So yeah, I hope everyone had a good weekend. I know the weather was kind of so-so, but I don't know what's going on now. Are you guys just working on papers and getting ready for finals, or what's happening? That's what's happening? That's what's happening? What's that?
I'm working on your paper.
Good. Because there's no final, right? Okay, let's say hello to people who are here. So, Ty's here. Good morning, Ty. Ananda's here. Hi, Ananda. Good morning. Helen's here. Good morning, Helen. Hadila's here. Good morning, Hadil. Michaela's here. Morning, Michaela. And Rose is here. Hello, Rose. John is here. Good morning. And Shania is here. Good morning to you. Yes, just so we remember, on Friday, remember that we did a little bit of a reimagining of the weight for the grading, right? We did a bit of a thing, right? So we changed the weighting of the micro papers and the quizzes, right? And I promised to give you the best 3 of your 4 quizzes. And were you here, B? Is that why you're looking at me with a slightly clueless expression? Yes, so we promised to, we had a bit of a vote. And so, because what happened was, good morning. What happened is that we had a category for reflective activities on the syllabus, and we really didn't get around to any reflective activities, so we needed to do something with that 10%. So we put 5% of it on the micropapers, 5% of it on the quizzes, and then I'm going to take the best 3 of your 4 quizzes. So I'm going to throw out the worst mark. And because attendance was so tricky to ascertain, I decided to just give everybody 100% for attendance. Not that that matters for you, but so that was the deal. That's what went down on Friday. Okay, so that decided. Cuban Missile Crisis. So we talked about that a little bit on Thursday and a little bit on Friday. And we said that this whole thing got started because, of course, Khrushchev, the Soviet leader of the Soviet Union, had an opportunity to kind of go get one up on the United States, right? A country right next door to the United States, or Cuba, went communist. They had a communist revolution under Fidel Castro. And Khrushchev said, oh, goody. Now I can make friends with Fidel Castro and have him take my nuclear missiles and point them at the United States, right? Which is exactly what he tried to do. Fortunately for the US, their spy planes detected that missile launch facilities were being built on Cuba. And so we had a little bit of a showdown, right? With the US quarantining or blockading the island of Cuba, making sure no Soviet ships could come in, and Soviet ships headed to Cuba with nuclear weapons, right? And the big question was, of course, was what is going to happen? Are these two actually going to trigger a war? Because again, nobody was really talking to each other, and nobody knew what was going to happen. Nobody knew if the ships were going to stop or if they weren't. And if they didn't, were the Americans going to fire on them or ram them? If somebody fired on them, was that an act of war? Does that mean that you use your nuclear weapons, or do you only use your nuclear weapons if the other side uses them first? And again, kind of tense, right? So throughout that whole period, everybody was kind of on the edge of their seat. I think it was about a week or 10 days. Everyone was on the edge of their seat. There were bombers constantly in the air with nuclear weapons ready to fly to Russia and bomb the heck out of them, and so it was pretty tense times, right? I also said as a little bit of a added tidbit that we managed to annoy the Americans at the time because they wanted to land their nuclear bombers on Canadian soil, and the Canadians said, you can't park here, sorry. And yeah, that sort of annoyed the Americans for a little bit. They got over it, but at the time they were not happy. Eventually we said this whole thing gets resolved with talking, right? So It's the Secretary of State Robert Kennedy and the ambassador to the U.S., the Soviet ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin. They sit down, they hash out an agreement, and everyone gets to step back, right? And so, whoops, I'm just going to jump ahead. Yeah, so we kind of learned a few lessons here, and some of them were lessons that we probably already knew, but they were reinforced by this particular incident. Number one, of course, is that these two sides had to talk to each other directly, and that's usually a good policy for any country. Even if they're your enemy, you should talk to them directly. You don't want to engage in a war of rhetoric where one leader gives a fiery speech to his nation and then another leader gives a fiery speech to his nation, and then they go back and forth and everybody gets agitated and ramped up. Really what you need is, yeah, you need to sit down, right? Diplomacy, sit down, talk it out. And that's kind of what happens here with Robert Kennedy and Anatoly Dobrynin. Again, the UN is helpless, right? Because both of these countries have a seat on the Security Council and they both have veto power. So the United States can propose that, you know, the Soviet Union back off, and the Soviet Union can veto that motion, right? And so they cancel each other out. And so the UN can't do anything, and it's up to these two countries to sort it out. But again, the value of diplomacy is kind of learned, and also the ability of both sides to save face, right? So to kind of not, how do we define that, to save face? To not, what do we say? We had a good description of what that meant. It meant, what's that? Yeah, kind of to preserve reputation, or kind of to the other side to preserve their dignity, right? So it's not like we need a winner and a loser here. Both sides can step back, both sides can come to a mutual agreement, and both sides can walk away, you know, without being humiliated, sort of thing. And so that was important as well. And so after that, we see that, again, the two sides start talking to each other more often. They put in a hotline directly from the White House to the Kremlin. And so if these two sides ever need to talk to each other, if they're ever confused about something, they can just pick up the phone and say, hey, what's going on, right? Which is incredibly helpful. And we also see that the Americans decide to commit even more forces to NATO and to West Berlin, right? So they get a little concerned about the security of Western Europe, even so. Yeah, and so this leads to that hotline. It leads to the beginning of Non-Proliferation Treaties. What was to proliferate again? What did that mean? To proliferate. What does it mean? What does it? Huh? No, not quite. What is it? To proliferate? To spread, right? When something proliferates, it spreads. So again, these non-proliferation treaties want to make sure that other countries don't get their hands on nuclear weapons either, because here's the news headline: apparently they're dangerous, people. Apparently they're world-ending weapons, which apparently people just figured out right now, which is ridiculous. But again, these treaties start to be sort of written up and formed. Lots of nations sign on to them. Of course, Canada is one of them. We don't have any nuclear weapons here. Hopefully the United States will protect us. Fingers crossed. Right, buddy? Okay, moving on. I didn't ask you to read this yet, did I? Did I ask you to read that? No? I think I'm going to ask you to read it now then. For online people, I'm just going to have to post it for you. So I'll do that right now. But in-person people can start reading right now. Online people, it'll show up in Microsoft Teams in 2 minutes, okay? All right.
Okay, online people, the reading you need is in Microsoft Teams for you.
Okay, can we talk about these? Yes, no, maybe so? Anyone? Is anyone out there? Hello? Come in. Mayday, mayday. Is anyone out there? All right. Let's talk about this first one, okay? Before I start doing even more bizarre stuff. So we start reading here and we see, of course, that Khrushchev is going to be deposed. What does that mean, deposed? Yeah, he gets thrown out of office. He gets kicked out. He gets fired, effectively, right? So Khrushchev gets fired, and any idea why? Basically, yes, right? It's kind of a combination of things that kind of the same struggles, the inside struggles that the Soviet Union is having continue to persist. You'll hear about agriculture in this section still. Like, we were dealing with food shortages in the Tsarist period, and then we were dealing with food shortages under Lenin, and then we were dealing with food shortages under Stalin, and now we're dealing with food shortages under Khrushchev, and now under Brezhnev, right? So there's this common theme, right? The Soviets can't seem to get this agricultural thing together enough to feed their people. So there's that. There's some other things. But yeah, he thinks that the Communist Party feels that he's too soft with the West, he's too chummy, and they feel that, we talked about the Cuban Missile Crisis, and we said that, it was a tense thing, but everybody negotiated, and everybody got to walk away, still looking like a man kind of thing. But the Soviets didn't see it that way. The Soviets felt that the Khrushchev had kind of misplayed his hand, and he backed down too easily in the face of American resistance, right? And so, yeah, they kind of push him out, which Khrushchev is pretty amazed because, this is the first time that a communist leader has been removed from office, right? Lenin died pretty early, but Stalin ruled until he died, right? And so this is kind of a new thing for the Soviets to kind of push aside a new leader without executing him and, put someone else in. So they put in this Leonid Brezhnev guy, right? And so what are his two challenges when he comes to power in 1964? Brezhnev. He has two challenges. What's that? Okay, that's. Can we be a little more specific? He has economic, social, and political problems. Okay, but what are the nature of those? Right. Okay, so there's the fact that, again, like we mentioned, Soviet agriculture is still underproducing, even though, and the figures are pretty sure, they're pouring a lot of money into agriculture, right? A lot of money is going into like technology and innovation, although it doesn't seem to be working, and a lot of money is going into price subsidies, right? So the real price of food in the Soviet Union is quite high, but the government is putting money into the system to keep the prices low. So again, the Soviets are pouring money into agriculture while exporting grain, because again, communism has to be seen as working. And again, they're still coming up short.
They said that because of their distribution system and lack of transportation, they had to rely on imports of grain.
Well, yeah, so they're doing both, right? So they're buying and selling at the same time. None of it makes any sense, right? But and again, because this is the thing, is that in part, communism has to be seen as working, right? That's always the struggle here. The second thing that's happening here as well is they have very poor tech and infrastructure, right? So as you see in this section, they're pouring massive amounts of money that they don't really have into the military to keep up their arms race with the United States, which the United States is, well, they're far richer, right? They're able to keep up this arms race, but the Soviets aren't. And so they're borrowing money, they're dumping it into agriculture with really no meaningful effect. They don't really have the infrastructure to move things around. So, trucks, storage depots, refrigeration, organization. Part of the thing so the tech is a problem, the infrastructure investment is a problem, but also what's a problem is the thing that Yuval Noah Harari told us about in his TED Talk about a month ago or so, right? He said that, one of the problems with communism and with fascism is that they're trying to make all the decisions in one room, right? And so here you're trying to plan out the economy of millions and millions and millions of people in one room, and it's too complicated. You can't do it, right? You can't make decisions for an entire country for everything all the time, right? There's just too much information and too many decisions to be made. And so these guys are sitting in a room trying to make decisions for an entire country, and it's not working, right? Because the system is too complicated, right? There's too many buttons to push and levers to turn and things to adjust, and they just can't do it, right? So this is what Yuval says in his talk, right? Is that democracy wins here because the decision making is distributed, right? Cities make decisions for cities, provinces make decisions for provinces, countries make decisions for countries. We have all kinds of police and hospitals and schools, and everybody's taking part in the decision-making process, and it's much more adaptable, right? But the communists don't do that. They want to make all the decisions in one little room, and it doesn't work, right? The system is too big and too complicated. And so, yeah, you see them just dumping massive amounts of money into agriculture, seemingly with no effect. The people are still going hungry. And that's a pretty shocking statistic, right? That the average Soviet citizen in the 1970s had the same quality of life as an American did in the 1920s, right? So for all of their kind of military firepower for the Soviet Union, their people are kind of 30 years behind in terms of quality of life, which is shocking, right? So yeah, Brezhnev has some domestic economic problems with agriculture that he desperately needs to solve. Spoiler alert, he won't. Spoiler alert, no one will. But he still has this problem. And again, it's the same problem that Khrushchev had, and it's the same one that Stalin and Lenin had as well. What's his other issue? What's that? That they were in debt. That's not one of them, but it is a problem, right? When you continually borrow vast sums of money that you can't pay back, that's trouble for anybody, not just countries. What's the other one?
We're still in the challenges of
Challenges of what?
We're still talking about this one.
I think so. I thought it was something about the West. What to do with the West?
The money he borrowed from the West, he couldn't pay back.
No.
The Jews,
This is what say what?
support for the Jewish people.
Maybe. I'm looking here, though. So the new Soviet leader was faced with a number of challenges. There was the problem of improving relations with the West, while at the same time coping with the social and economic programs at home and asserting control over the Soviet bloc in Eastern Europe. Maybe there's three? Maybe he's got three things. So domestic economic issues, the situation with the West, right? How to deal with the U.S. and then how to deal with the Soviet bloc. Maybe there's three. I don't know. Maybe that's not a good question. I think we could probably agree. Brezhnev has a full plate, right? He's got a lot. He's got a lot to deal with. Things are not going swimmingly at this point, right? I think we already have, but let's. So what are the economic conditions in the Brezhnev years? We've mentioned a few things already, right? What's that? Yeah, we said kind of miserable, right? So Soviet citizens have a much lower quality of life than their American counterparts, right? And in fact, they're kind of decades behind in terms of in terms of quality of life and consumer goods and all that stuff. Remember all the stuff that we talked about in the Roaring 20s? Cars and vacuum cleaners and fashion and everybody going out drinking and having a good time. The Soviets don't have any of that stuff. And that was 50 years earlier, right? The Soviets don't have any of that stuff. And so there's that, right? We know that the Soviet Union is borrowing heavily from Western banks, and it's questionable whether they'll ever be able to pay that money back, but they're borrowing anyway. What else do we know? Agriculture continues to underperform. That's always a safe answer with the Soviet Union. Mm-hmm. Diplomatic, eh? What'd you say, Alina? Yeah, housing shortages. Yeah, people are crammed into these tiny Soviet era apartment buildings, which I've stayed in, and they're tiny. When I used to go to Russia, I would rent an apartment from someone we knew, and he and his wife and his small child lived in this apartment. And it was a one-bedroom apartment, and it had a living room, it had a kitchen, and the kitchen was like so small that like everything in it almost looked like like it was made for children. Like the size of a stove, right? All of you guys have like a stove in your house or apartment or whatever. This stove was like 2/3 the size, so it was a little stove. And then there's like a fridge. We're all used to a fridge, but it was like a little fridge. And then their sort of dining table, the table they ate at, was this tiny little table that, like, I don't know how you sat at it, because the man in this couple was taller than I was. And so somehow, I don't know how he was living in this apartment, because he was sitting at this tiny table and chairs. And they're the smallest little apartments. And again, people would, families of 4 would live in these things, right? So yeah, there's a real housing shortage here. What else is going on?
Except for the size of the apartments, they said that as people move from rural areas to urban areas, they couldn't find.
Yeah, there's just not enough housing, right? And again, this is problematic because all the decisions about housing are being made in Moscow by the Central Committee, right? And the Central Committee cannot, housing is difficult to deal with in any country, never mind when you're trying to make all housing decisions from a single room, right? So yeah, there's housing shortages, there's food shortages, there's people moving from the country to the city that have nowhere to go, there's low quality of life, there's increasing debt. Big problems, right? And look at that, what page is it on here? On page 201, you can see that woman staring forlornly at the thing. So she's at the grocery store, right? She's at the supermarket, and it says, I think it says at the top there, "Молочные продукты," which is dairy. It's like milk products is what it is. So yeah, if you're looking for any butter or cheese or milk, you won't find any of it there. There's nothing at all, right? And again, I don't know about your experience, but in the West, you don't often go to a grocery store and find nothing at all in in any part of the grocery store, right? But this was a common occurrence in Soviet Russia, is food shortages where you go to the store to buy even the basic stuff, right? Like sugar, butter, flour, coffee, salt, meat, tinned meat, even just going to buy the bare bones staples, not there, right? What's that? There's lots of kind of dark Soviet humor that comes out of this, but one joke I remember is this woman she's a Soviet Union, she walks into a store and she looks around and the case, the display case is empty, and she says to the shopkeeper, she's like, hey, do you have any meat? And the guy says, no, we're the store that doesn't have any cheese. The store that doesn't have any meat is across the street. Which is funny, but also not, because it wasn't much of a joke. It was true, right? The Soviets were just trying to, have a little fun with it. So yeah, economic conditions are dismal, right? What's going on? This is the last. We'll talk about Czechoslovakia and then we'll take a break. What's going on in Czechoslovakia here in the later '60s? Huh? I was gonna jump to Czechoslovakia first. I was gonna leave Romania. What's happening? There's a new secretary. Yeah, Alexander Dubček. And what does Alexander want to do in Czechoslovakia? Ooh, a lot of stuff. Yeah, big changes. What does Dubček and his party propose? Okay, so no censorship. What is censorship? The news. Say that one more time. Yeah, when something isn't shown, right? So to censor something is to kind of block it or keep people from seeing it, right? So Alexander Dubček says, okay, no more censorship. You can say what you want. Okay, what else?
He said that non-communist parties, like organizations, can show up.
Right.
So,
One second. So other organizations can form that are not the Communist Party, right? Communist countries are usually a one-party state. Alexander Dubček says other organizations can form, right? Some that might actually evolve into political parties, which would be weird for a communist state. And one of them appears and starts monitoring human rights, which of course communist countries don't really like because they tend to abuse human rights. But anyway, what else? Freedom of speech, yeah, you can say what you want, especially criticizing the communist government and communism itself. Eek. What else? Oh, yeah, so free travel. So Czechoslovakian citizens can travel outside of their borders. What's that? And to the west. Whew. What else? Journalistic freedom, I think they say. Freedom of the press?
bureaucrats only from like the ranks of the Communist Party. That was what was going on. Alexander, I don't know who said that, okay, no, that's not going to happen.
Right, so the appointing of non-communists to government positions, that's now possible. Whew, right? This is a lot of freedom. This is like a breath of fresh air. It's almost like spring. Maybe that's why they were calling it the Prague Spring. Anyway, this is quite something, right? How do the Soviets react to this?
Well, they didn't do anything about the Warsaw Pact. They were like, okay,
Right, so lessons were learned.
the Soviets, they reacted pretty mildly, just a four-pronged attack.
Yeah, it was a mild reaction. There was just a four-pronged invasion into Czechoslovakia with, again, with 250,000 troops and 7,500 tanks, not to mention airfare and all, or aircraft and all that stuff. I'm sure there was airfare, but that's another thing. Yeah, so the Soviets do not, this is a lot of freedom, right? This is a lot of freedom that Alexander Dubček is proposing. And even though he tries to say, yes, but we'll stay in the Warsaw Pact, so don't go all Hungarian Revolution on us, doesn't work, right? Way too much freedom, especially freedom of the press and freedom to criticize whoever you want, freedom to leave the country. No, right? The Soviet Union isn't having any of that, particularly because, again, once you give it to one country, the other ones are going to want it as well. And maybe that's a lesson that the Soviet Union learns from the last time, right? In the early 1960s, they gave Poland some economic freedoms, and then Hungary was kind of getting all uppity and wanting freedoms as well, and they had to squash the revolution. So again, if they don't keep a tight leash on Czechoslovakia, all the other countries are going to want freedoms as well, and then they're going to have a lot of trouble on their hands, right? So again, they kind of make an example of Czechoslovakia crushing their attempted reform movement.
Yeah, but the Czechoslovakians didn't fight back. It says that they learned their lessons and they gave up the fight.
Yeah, they said they used passive resistance. What is that? What's passive resistance? What's that? Sometimes sabotage. To passively resist kind of means that you don't do what they say, right? You don't do what the Soviets say, but you don't fight back either. So you'll often see this, people demonstrating, for a cause. They'll just like sit in front of a building, right? Or they'll block a road or something. And the cops will show up and they'll say, please move out of the road. And the protesters won't move. And so eventually, sometimes the police will have to start arresting people. But the people don't fight back. So, right, so the passive resistance is that you don't fight back. So you might allow yourself to be taken to jail by the police, and they'll cuff you, and they'll put you in the car and all that stuff. But you don't fight back. So here, the Czechs don't fight back. And, relatively few people are injured or killed, right? But nice. It was a nice thought, right? It was a nice thought. And then out of this comes the Brezhnev Doctrine, right? So we had the Truman Doctrine, right? The idea that the United States would intervene to support free peoples who are under threat from internal armed minorities or outside pressures, right? So what's the Brezhnev Doctrine?
Soviet Union would intervene to suppress free peoples and those who want to fight back against armed minorities.
Basically. So the Brezhnev Doctrine is basically, it's almost the mirror opposite, right? The idea that the Soviet Union has the right to intervene in countries where communism is under threat, right? Where free peoples might be attempting to overthrow communism, the Soviet Union will make sure that that does not happen, right? So Brezhnev kind of says that, yeah, if you try to overthrow or threaten communism in your Soviet bloc country, you have a date with the Red Army, right? Just so you know, right? So again, we're still seeing a pretty heavy-handed Soviet Union, right? And anyone who tries to sort of push back against communism or Soviet control is going to suffer the wrath of they're going to suffer the wrath, right? Whew, okay, you want to take a little break? A little breaky? Yeah. Let's take a quick break and we'll come back in 10, okay? Okay. Okay, people, and we are back. So we were just talking about Star Wars, but before that we were talking about Leonid Brezhnev, right? The new leader of the Soviet Union. We said he's got all kinds of problems on his hands, economic problems at home with food shortages and quality of life issues. They're importing grain, they're exporting grain, they're borrowing all kinds of money. It's bad news, right? Economically bad news. They're trying to figure out how to deal with the West, of course, and they're locked in a arms race with the United States, one that they won't be able to win. And of course, they have some Eastern Bloc countries who are pushing for revolution, right? So the Czechoslovakia, of course, gets a new party secretary, Alexander Dubček. Alexander proposes all kinds of new freedoms for Czechoslovakians, which I'm sure they would enjoy. But unfortunately, they won't have a chance to enjoy them because the Red Army will roll in and throw Dubček in jail, I believe, right? What's going on in Poland? What's going on in Poland? What is happening in Poland?
The guys who were in control of Poland, I really can't read these guys' names.
Oh yeah. So okay. So where are we in Poland here? Oh yeah. So Władysław Gomulka. Oh, Polish names are tough. They don't get written in English very well in terms of pronunciation. So they're always a little weird. So yeah, we've got Władysław Gomulka, who's the leader of Poland, and what's he dealing with?
He realizes that economic reforms are necessary, so he makes some of them. He doesn't allow political reforms. He uses Jewish people as scapegoats, and then he kicks them all out of the country. He gets into some I didn't exactly remember what happened, but some strikes and stuff happened.
There's kind of a complicated. It's a complicated decade of Polish history, right? But basically, what's happening here is kind of the same thing that's happening in the Soviet Union. Communism doesn't work, or at least Soviet communism doesn't work, right? And so the Poles have been practicing Soviet-style communism because that's what Moscow told them to do, but it doesn't work. There are food shortages. People are protesting and going on strike. It's a problem. But of course, the text mentions that Poland has a few things working in its favor, right? So it has credit that it's able to get from the West. It's able to get Soviet economic support. And in the 70s, there is actually, or the early 70s, there's a demand for Polish raw materials like coal, right? So Poland actually has the money to be able to ride out this issue. And so they raise salaries a little bit, they keep the price of food low, and Gomulka tries to sort of point the finger at students or Jewish people or anyone else as a scapegoat for the economic problems in Poland, right? He doesn't want the Poles blaming the Soviet Union because that's a dangerous game, right? When you start revolting against the Soviet Union, you get the Red Army, right? So Gomulka tries to point the finger at, less scary groups. In the meantime, he's got enough money to kind of smooth things out. But eventually, that's not going to be the case, right? Eventually, there's going to be a recession, a worldwide recession. Profits are going to go down. He's going to have less money. And so what's he do? Well, he tries to raise prices, right, for meat, which goes up 60%, and then later 100%. Yikes, right? And so people start going on strike, right? And so not good. You can't run a country when people don't work, right? So he's got to get these people back to work. And so that kind of brings us to solidarity. What's solidarity? What does the word mean, solidarity? To hug? No, not hug. What does it mean? What's that? Yeah, it's kind of standing united with a group, right? So standing in solidarity is standing in support of, right? I'm with these people. And so this solidarity thing, that's what it means, but what is it in Poland? Or what does it start out as? Kind of interesting, actually. Very interesting. Well, it starts out at the Gdansk shipyards, right? The Gdansk shipyards. So Gdansk is a city in Poland, right? And at the shipyards, the place where they build ships, these guys decide they're going to go on strike, right? And so they go on strike, and they have kind of a leader. A leader emerges from these shipyards. What's his name? Am I breaking it? What am I doing?
So the shipyard thing happens,
Yep.
and then comes the aid from the US, from the West, the Soviets, and the demand. After the demand comes the recession, then the prices increase,
Right.
the people go on strike, the government just smashes the prices, say, okay, whatever, go back to what you were.
True.
Then, yeah, then we'll stuff happens.
I think it's true. I may be breaking continuity a little bit. Also, but there's probably a lot of strikes moving through the 1970s, and so this one at the Gdansk shipyards is not the first one, but it is an important one, I guess, because it leads to this solidarity thing. So this guy, Lech Walesa, he's someone who kind of emerges from this strike. I think he's an electrician, actually, but I think he works in the shipyards, and he kind of emerges as a leader of this group, right? And so what do these shipyard workers want? What are their demands initially? Or what do they get? Yeah, so they want to be recognized as a trade union, right? So they want to be recognized as a group of workers united together, and that union, that group of people, will elect people to speak on their behalf, right? So again, this is very useful if you're dealing with a big employer, right? Because if I'm the head of a giant factory and Beatrice comes in one day and asks me for a raise, I can say, haha, no dice, Beatrice. Go work somewhere else if you don't like it, right? It's very easy for me to do. But if Beatrice comes to me and says, actually, I represent all 3,000 of your workers, and we would like a raise, or we're not coming into work tomorrow, then I got to deal with it, right? Beatrice is Beatrice is expendable, right? I can fire her and replace her, and no big deal. You're not replaceable. I can fire her and replace her, and it's no big deal, right? But if the entire factory comes to me and says, we want to talk salary, and if you don't want to talk with us, we're not coming into work, that's a problem, right? I can't replace an entire factory of workers tomorrow. So I got to deal with them. Beatrice has leverage, right? If her workers are unionized, then they have leverage. If Beatrice is just in here on her own, she has no leverage, and I'm probably just going to tell her where the door is, right? So again, these Gdansk shipyard workers want the right to be recognized as a union so that they can bargain collectively, which is what I was just talking about. They can negotiate as a group rather than just one at a time. What else do they want or get? Yeah, better working conditions. Yeah, maybe Saturdays off. Ugh, totally unreasonable, right? Saturdays off. What else do they want? They want their Catholic church masses to be broadcast on the radio in the shipyards. Ugh, greedy, right? These poor guys. So those are kind of the things that they ask for. And do they get them? Yeah. They do, right? And the most important one of these things is the fact that they get recognition as a union, as a trade union. Because what happens after that? So after these shipyard workers get their own union, what's that? Solidarity is born, but just before that, all these other kind of professions and trades, they get recognized as unions as well, right? So the Polish government says, oh, fine, yeah, the shipyard workers can have their own, they can have their own union, and the postal workers, and the electricians, and the plumbers, and the streetcar drivers, fine. All you guys can have your own unions, fine, right? But then what happens? Yeah, then they all unite, right? All of these trade unions unite into one giant union called Solidarity, right? So now, or not now, but at one point there in the kind of coming into the 1980s, Solidarity has 8 million people in it. This is a trade union of 8 million people. So when Solidarity goes to the government and says, hey, we want to talk about wages or working conditions or food prices, you pretty much have to listen to them, right? 8 million of how many people in Poland? 35? Yeah, because if Solidarity says, either you talk to us or we're not coming into work tomorrow, that means that basically most of the country's workers are not coming into work tomorrow. That's a big problem for a government, right? You have to listen to them because now they are too big to be ignored. Beatrice had no leverage at all on her own, but as the head of a trade union of 1,000 or 3,000 workers, she's got leverage. As a factory owner, I have to listen to her. But if she's the head of a union like Lech Walesa here, of 8 million people in all kinds of different industries, if I'm the government, yeah, I got to listen to you because you're a big problem, right? If you tell everyone not to come into work tomorrow because I don't want to negotiate, I'm going to have major issues, right? I'm going to have no police. There's going to be no food on the shelves. No mail is getting delivered. Nobody can get to work because the streetcar drivers aren't working. People's plumbing, people's toilets are overflowing, but the plumbers are on strike. Nobody's picking up the garbage. The garbage is piling up everywhere. Chaos, right? I can't have that. And so when Beatrice, the head of Solidarity, or Lech Walesa in this case, comes to the government and says, hey, we need to talk, the government pretty much has to listen to him, right? Because, again, he's got so much behind him. And so, the Polish government gives a little bit. They're like, oh, fine, have a union. Oh, fine, all you guys have unions too. But then it kind of backfires on them because they all unite together in solidarity, and then they have major leverage on the government. They can really push the government to do what they want it to do until 1980, 81, and then what happens? What's that? Well, not in red. It has to do with that General Jaruzelski. No, I'm the one who can't pronounce names. Where is he? Yeah. In October, General Jaruzelski, Prime Minister and Defense Minister, took over as Communist Party chief. So Jaruzelski replaces Gomulka. And what's Jaruzelski's, what's his approach to solidarity? Right. So he doesn't want, so Beatrice again comes to me, Jaruzelski, and wants to negotiate, Jaruzelski says, you know what? Too much. You're asking too much. I'm not talking to you, right? So negotiations break down. Solidarity threatens to strike. And what does he do? Rounds them up and throws them in jail, right? Not all 8 million, but the leaders get rounded up and thrown into jail. And I think Solidarity is made illegal as well. Yeah, so telephone and telex communications were cut. Transport of goods was halted. Factories occupied, so soldiers head in. Strikes were outlawed, and the arrest of the leaders had begun. And so I think at this point, I think Solidarity is made illegal as well. I think. Don't quote me on that one. I could be wrong. Either way, the government brings down the hammer, right? They're not negotiating with Lech Walesa. Lech actually goes to jail for a little while. And it seems like they've lost their leverage, right? But don't worry, they'll be back. Okay, where are we now? Oh yeah, okay, that. Okay. Before we end, I'll just tell you two things. So number one, don't forget your final paper is due on Sunday, the 6th of December. I was going to say also don't forget, but you can't forget this because I haven't told you yet. I won't be here on Friday, and so on Friday, it's just a day for you to work on your papers, okay? So stay home, work on your papers. You can come here, I guess, if you want, but I imagine you would probably, first class of the day, I imagine you would stay home. But make sure you get up and you are in front of your computer at 8 o'clock working on your paper, not sleeping in. I have no way of determining what you will or will not do. But again, I'm going to give you Friday to work on those papers because I can't be here on Friday. Okay. And again, I don't think it makes sense to get a substitute because, you guys probably wouldn't come in anyway, and it's a whole thing. So, yeah, I'm taking the day because I got to do some stuff, and you guys can work on your papers on Friday. Okay. Okay. That said, I think I'm going to end it here today. Tomorrow I have some more video to show you. We'll talk about Brezhnev, and then I think we're pretty close to Gorbachev as well, but. Yeah, they're going to die real quick. Yeah. Yep. Both, yeah, so spoiler alert, but after Brezhnev dies, there'll be two other Communist Party leaders, Konstantin Chernenko and what's his name? Yuri Andropov. And both of them will live about a year before they die. And so it's very embarrassing, very embarrassing for the Soviet Union that their leaders keep dying every year. And so they're going to need a fresh, young leader, and they will choose Mikhail Gorbachev, who's about 45 when he becomes Communist Party secretary, which is very young, by the way. Yes, yes, he's got lots of reform ideas too, but we'll get to him. Okay, that is all for today. Have a nice rest of Monday, and I will see you tomorrow.